Hi, my name's Michael Devine. I work for Ziggurat Interactive, and we have a special guest with us, somebody I know really well. His name is Mark Caldwell. He was one of the very, very first people at New World Computing. I met him in the late 90s when a little company I spent 7 years at called 3DO acquired New World Computing. And we had a number of really cool years together. So, Mark, hello. It's really good to see
Hello.
you.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Yeah. So, um, New World Computing, I know you probably don't remember much about your time there. What's your first memory of meeting John Van Caneghem?
Van Caneghem.
Thank you.
I met him and Michelle, his wife at the time, while he was in the middle of programming Might and Magic 1. He had submitted it to some distributors, and I was talking to him about his game at the time, and we became good friends, and that's how we met.
So you told me previously that he was working on Might and Magic 1 then, and then a few years later, when he was working on Might and Magic 2, that's where you got more formally involved with the studio?
Well, no, I mean, when we got picked up by Activision as their first affiliated publisher, at that time, we had some money coming in. John had sold 5,000 units out of his apartment, and I was involved with him. He had built the game, he had run the ads, he had talked to lots of distributors, he had done it all. It was basically a one-stop shop for John. He had done everything, and I was with him, at the later stages of that. But officially, I joined New World Computing as employee number one when we signed on with Activision in, I want to say it was like April 15th, tax day, and 1987, I think. We had just signed on. We were Activision's first affiliated publisher. EA had already had something called affiliated labels. Activision was trying to catch up, and they did a great job distributing our game. I mean, we went from 5,000 to 150,000 units overnight, which was a ton of units back then. And we were off and running, and then we started working on different versions of Might and Magic because they wanted it for, the Commodore 64 or for, various different platforms. So we looked at various different companies we could use to hire to do that. And, meanwhile, John started working on Might and Magic 2 as well. And, those were the early days.
What was it like going from working in, as you were saying, John's apartment as a small indie studio to suddenly exploding and becoming a much bigger studio with much bigger reach?
Well, I think the much bigger studio included a 3 office with like a little tiny warehouse. That was the extent of the explosion. We went from his apartment to an office building in Sherman Oaks, which was right behind Sherwin-Williams paint store in the little dead end cul-de-sac, and it had like 3 offices, a little front area, and a little warehouse area where we did our own shrink wrapping, and we did our own packaging, and we did all of our own stuff at the time. So we had to learn how to drive forklifts and use the shrink wrap machine and do all kinds of cool stuff. What we would do is we would run down to this rental place down the street. We would get the forklift, drive it back to our area, load up the trucks that would come to get the games, and then drive it back and drop it off. And that's how we would set the game. We did all the packaging and everything ourselves. The disc manufacturing on 5.25 inch floppies, 5.5 inch floppies, was done by a company called Allenback in Carlsbad. I don't know if they're still around or not, but anyway, they did all of our disc duplication back in the days. Other than that, we got the boxes printed. We put everything together ourselves and shipped it off.
Do you remember how many units of the Might and Magic series you guys ultimately sold?
I don't think it's possible to count. I mean, we did, so many different versions of it. Things like, the Apple II, we did an IBM, we did a Commodore 64, there was Amiga versions, there were Nintendo versions.
Right.
And that wasn't all done by us. We would license that out to those companies in those areas, and they would do the distribution on that. And I'm sure if we had all of our records and books today, we'd go back and count them up. But it was worldwide. We were selling everywhere.
So when did you begin to branch out from Might and Magic to other titles and working with other developers?
Well, we knew that we couldn't produce every game in the world, and that eventually we would need to adopt sort of a book publishing model, what we thought was, at the time, where we would bring in other authors to write other stories for us or other games for us. And so, we started looking around at this little event at the time called the Computer Game Developers Conference for developers to do games. But we also, started to earn friends and, stuff by going to CES, which at the time was, every 6 months. It was in Vegas and in Chicago, and they didn't have the Electronic Entertainment Expo, which they have now. So we would meet a lot of people at those events. But, ultimately we knew we couldn't make role-playing games, and we didn't want to just make role-playing games for the rest of our lives either. So in the afternoons or at night, when, instead of going home, we'd actually just sit in the back and we'd play games. We'd play, board games, Avalon Hill, games like 1830. And that's what we would play. And then in the middle of that, we thought, well, hey, we should do a strategy game. And that's when we created what was called King's Bounty, which later became known as Heroes of Might and Magic. And that's when we got into strategy. And then, let's try other kinds of games as well. We started branching off into other things.
Actually, and Heroes of Might and Magic is one of my all-time favorite games. I remember when 3DO acquired New World, I was given a bunch of games to take a look at and get myself familiar with as the head of sales at the time. And I think it was actually Heroes of Might and Magic 2 was the first game that I was playing, and it was like Christmas time. And I just played it for hours and hours and hours and hours and convinced myself, and rightfully so, it was the best game I'd ever played. I absolutely was in love with it until you guys came out with Heroes 3. And then I thought that was the best one ever. And I got to say, I'm pretty sure Heroes 3 was right up there with the best-selling games in the history of 3DO. I mean, the evolution between 2, 3, and 4 was just amazing. The things that you added there. You were very, very involved in the Heroes series. What was your role?
I was a fan of doing strategy games, and so I kind of helped push it in that direction. John was the game designer. I mean,
right.
He did it. We pushed everything past John. But I seem to recall, and I might be mistaken, but I seem to recall this was the first game I actually started programming on from scratch. We did all of our programming at the time in assembly. So Might and Magic 1 and Might and Magic 2 were all done in assembly on the Apple II. King's Bounty was the first game we started writing in C. It wasn't even C++ yet. It was just still C, Kerningham and Ritchie. So I had written some utilities. We would play these games called 1830, and it was a railroad game, and it was all about money. And you really never knew who had what value, because property had value, tracks had value, money had value. And you wouldn't really know until you got really close to the end who was actually winning, because you had a lot of money invested in certain things. So I wrote this program that would go through and keep track of all the stuff so you could know in real time who was winning and who was losing. And I would keep track of this as we were playing, and then I'd have it all hidden so you couldn't see, but I could hit a button to see quickly who was what. And it all worked out well. And I wrote it all in C just so I could teach myself how to do C, because everything else was in assembly. And then from there, we started writing King's Bounty. And we did a lot of King's Bounty in assembly as well. I think the Apple II version was in assembly, and then the IBM version was in C. We had rewritten it all in C for the PC version. I don't remember what the question was, but that was a cool story anyway.
It was a very cool story, and I do kind of remember the question. Hey, last thing I'm going to ask you before we go to the games we're talking about today, was the Heroes series, was that the first time you got involved with expansion packs and eventually would become DLC, or had you done that prior to the Heroes series?
No, I think that was the first. That was the first. We didn't, and the expansion packs I think came after Heroes 3. And during Heroes 4 timeframe, we had just had so much content we were creating, because we had created these level editors, and we just had this group of designers that would go through and design the levels. And the greatest thing about it was we would go through and put all the hard stuff in, what the tasks were and everything else. And then we would take that map and we'd give it to a group of artists. And they were all girls at the time. Not that that matters one way or the other, but they just happened to be all girls. And they would go in and they would beautify it. And they would put little flowers here and rocks, and they would paint these little things, and they put it on. They would make the maps just look beautiful. I mean, John and I would have these maps that were just sparse but had events on them. And by the time we got them out of the art department, they were just beautified. And it was the beautification department. And it was so amazing. But the tools we had written gave them the ability to do that. And also then later gave us the ability to create expansion packs, because eventually anybody could use that tool and create a map. And that's how we kind of got into the expansion packs, was that expansion packs. Wow. Because, the tools we had made it possible.
Putting the Might and Magic and Heroes of Might and Magic aside, of everything that you did at New World, what was the game that you felt most connected to? Either that you liked the best, or you found the most interesting to create, or just basically one you remember incredibly fondly?
Well, I mean, there's just too many. I mean, I love the Might and Magic series. I was always a role player. I played Dungeons and Dragons growing up, very similar. I was very, very integral in, the shift to strategy and the King's Bounty franchise. Crazy story on that is we had developed a board game version of King's Bounty first, and then distributed that through a company we owned called Task Force Games. And then we made the PC version of it. But, and John had designed all of that stuff.
Hey, Mark, let's start with a little bit about Planet's Edge. Tell me what you remember about Planet's Edge. In particular, what kind of DNA was there between the development of Planet's Edge and Heroes of Might and Magic?
Well, I mean, we were all the same team. We actually had brought a new programmer in, Eric. He was a great programmer and a designer, and he worked on the design and the programming of Planet's Edge. And this was the first game we had that actually had any 3D elements in it. Like we could take graphics and spin them around and do all kinds of stuff. Eric had done all the programming on that. I don't remember why we started doing the game Planet's Edge or why we gave it the name Planet's Edge. But from a programming standpoint, I remember we brought in this guy, Eric. He was a great programmer. He had good ideas, and he worked mostly on it. I didn't work that much on Planet's Edge myself because I was focused on, Might and Magic and Heroes and some other products as well.
Well, you guys had obviously this really big experience in fantasy RPG. And of course, Planet's Edge is sci-fi.
Right,
do you remember any discussions about how to handle it differently or your approach to it or, making something that really was not a genre that you guys were known for?
Well, I mean, we weren't known for strategy either, but we moved into it, right?
Right.
And the same thing goes, holds true. We knew that we needed to get ideas from outside because we couldn't just be stale with our own ideas, right? Eventually. So we need other ideas from other people. And that's why we brought different people in to have different ideas and do these kind of games. I think we were very excited. I know we all wanted to do a sci-fi game, lots of other kinds of games we wanted to do. And we were very excited to do it. I don't remember exactly why we started it or how it happened. Sorry.
You didn't have to go through a focus group and weeks or months of analysis.
No, the crazy thing is back in those days, we were the focus group. If we liked it, we said, let's do it. We didn't actually spend a lot of time and money trying to go through focus groups. We just said, look, this is a game I want to play. And that was the crazy thing about Might and Magic. John had made a game he wanted to play. He was tired of sitting around a table, listening to people, talk about whatever for hours and getting nothing done. And he said, let's make, a D&D game, style game. And, so that you could play and have fun without the BS of Dungeons and Dragons sitting around a computer table. And he made a game he liked and everybody else liked to play it too. I mean, that was our gauge. If we liked it, other people might like it too.
Let's talk a little bit also about the next title, Wetlands, that you were a producer on, but you were working with an external studio. And this is actually looking back at that game, and actually, it doesn't remind me of anything else that you guys had done.
Yeah, I mean, and again, branching out, doing crazy stuff. We had some developers who were contacting us. We got stuff from all kinds of developers all over the world. And this developer in New Jersey, Hypnotics, came to us with this concept, and we thought, wow, this is a great concept. We didn't, the name rail shooter, I don't think existed at the time, but we were like, wow, okay, and look how beautiful it is. It was very rendered, and it kind of flowed like you could kind of go in and you move the mouse, you move separately, so you had control over what was going on. And the graphics were really great. These guys were really good at doing graphics. It was a beautiful, beautiful game. It reminded me a lot of Myst that I think Broderbund had put out, which was another great game, but it was just beautiful. Right. And I thought, wow, let's just go beyond, what we can render in 3D, real time. And let's do something pre-rendered. Right. And that's what these guys came to us with, was all this stuff that was pre-rendered. It was just beautiful.
There were a lot, actually, before you get to the shooting, there's actually a lot of story and a lot of animation, actually really impressively. How did that integrate into the design? Did that just come from the external studio, or did you guys work with them at all in figuring about how to present the game to get into the action sequences?
Yeah, we were always involved very, very much. I mean, the concept was theirs, the idea was theirs, the storyline was theirs. We just worked with them on refining it and making it, fit within a scheme that we would like, and things that made sense to us, and cutting out stuff that didn't work. And we were the kind of studio that said, look, you're the writer. We like the concept. You go out and write the book, right? And we'll edit it. And that's the approach we took. We were very much a book publisher mentality. Stephen King's not going to work for a company, but you need a guy like Stephen King, right, to be able to create those books.
Do you remember the response when Wetlands came out?
It was mixed. I remember that, people didn't understand the kind of genre or what it was about. And, some people thought it was the greatest thing ever. And other people thought, hey, why don't I have more control over the video? Because they really wanted to move around in real time in these 3D environments, which just wasn't possible on computers at the time. And so it was mixed. I mean, we were a little ahead of our time, but I thought the game was great. You have to weed through some of the reviews sometimes to get to the good content, in my opinion.
Zephyr was one that I think you and JVC were both very, very involved in.
Well, we wanted a driving game. We wanted to do a driving game. This was an internal group that John and I had input on, but we weren't really involved in the day-to-day because, again, Might, Magic, and Heroes were the biggest franchises we were working on. So we had some group of people that really wanted to do a 3D game. This was our first, I think, real-time 3D engine, true 3D engine game that we had made. Might and Magic at the time were 3D, but like I've said many times, it was really sort of a fake 3D. It wasn't a real 3D engine. This was a real 3D engine where you were actually, shifting polygons and moving stuff around, and you could drive anywhere you wanted. So we were experimenting a lot with what we could do with this technology and how we could drive things around. A lot of elements just came together. I mean, the name Zephyr just rung out with people. The box was this crazy box we put together that rung out with people. The graphics were just crazy. That rung out with people. It had a lot of great things, that were just unique and different from anything else we had done before.
I know. How did you get that box produced? that is one unusually shaped box.
It was very weird. I don't know. You have to talk to the marketing guy, Scott McDaniel,
Yeah.
Who did all that stuff. He was amazing.
Yeah, no, that was actually that was really cool.
And game balance is a huge thing that we always focused on at New World Computing. The biggest thing there is that we knew when we started playing a game, if everybody had a different opinion about how to get things done, that we had the balance right. So in the early days of Heroes, this is where we started honing this ability, and John was really integral in making sure that all happened. But we all wanted the Titans first, or we all wanted the Ghosts first, or we all wanted the Dragons first. And he just kept changing things. We're like, stop changing it. I love the Titans the way they were, But then all of a sudden, everybody had a different opinion about what it was, and that's when we realized we had the balance of the creatures and everything else down. And the same thing with squad-based games. How many you can select at a time, how you can control the keys and make them run off to certain areas and stuff. Again, a lot of that's all balance and just trial and error, making sure that you've got something that feels right, that moves right, that works right. And again, it's iteration, again and again and again, making sure you get it right.
Through you did the acquisition, and you went through a round of new technologies, new games, and a lot of the older games kind of, they were off the shelf at retailers. And then eventually the games became really hard to find. And in this last decade, there's been a real renaissance of retro gaming, or as you and I might call gaming. And so what do you think about now that someone can go on a Steam or GOG and actually be able to experience these games for the first time?
I think it's great. I mean, my kids ask me, hey, Dad, what kind of games did you work on? And I tell them, they're like, I never heard of that. Okay, great, you're 12. You know nothing. But I think it's great because it helps bring it back into the light. We had a lot of fun making these games. We had a lot of fun playing these games. I mean, there are still Heroes fanatics all over the world that just love the music in the game. And there was an orchestra in Russia last year in front of 5,000 people that just played the music from Heroes for the entire audience. That's the whole thing was about, playing the music from Heroes. So, you just have to transcend, the different styles and audiences of people that care different things about the music or about the game or about whatever. And they're out there and they love every aspect of it. And
we're talking about the renaissance of retro gaming. And Mark, I was struck by how many original, different, and unique games there were back in the day, 25, 30 years ago, versus now, where they kind of fall into certain engines and certain genres. Did you feel added pressure in how many unique concepts you guys had to crank through at New World?
No, I don't think so. I think one of the advantages we had back then was we did develop our own technology. There was a limit to that technology, so we really didn't have to exceed too many expectations, much like today where you have Unity and Unreal. Everybody pretty much uses those two engines, and you're getting content that's very, very similar because the engines do similar things. We didn't have that restriction. We could do whatever we wanted to do. technology at the time had a limitation as well. So we only had to bump up against that limitation so much. So I think it was actually easier for us to create our own engines and manage our own technology because there was a limit to what technology could do. Today, it's a lot harder. There's wonderful tools available, but still, I think there's still a lot of similar content because everybody's using similar tools. Part of why I think we were diverse is because we created a new tool when we created a new game. And we would use that tool as much as we could, but then we would move on and create a new tool when we created a new game again. And that was actually part of the fun. Because in the middle of programming, you're like, gosh, I could do this so much better, but I have to move on because I have so many other things to do. So coming back and starting a new tool again, you could take parts of what you've done before and then make it a little bit better. And then that in itself would make the games better and perform better and just look better and do everything else better.
So I know when 3DO acquired New World, one of the things that those was the 3DO figured out really quickly was that New World was connected to its fan base in a really unique way. I know that today, you publish a game and like 4 seconds later, you're getting reviews. People are making comments. People are tearing apart everything that you've done technically. But back then, none of that existed. So how did the fans interact with you guys, and why were they so integrated, sort of, and owned so many of the games they played that you made?
Well, how we were connected was through magazines, A+, Nibble, Computer Shopper. I mean, there were lots of great magazines back in those days, and we worked with the editors and the publishers of those magazines to try to make sure that we got our story right, so we could actually have input on the story before it was actually written. A lot of times, they would write the story about the game, then call us, hey, we just want to check a few facts with you, and we could mold it a little bit to make sure that it got printed. Still favorably, but also truthfully. With what's going on nowadays, anybody can just print something, and whether it's true or not, I mean, fake news, fake review, right? Whether they like a game or not. So I think that was one way to keep connected. Was there was probably a lot less of the press getting to a user. They had a more refined view of what was going on, something that actually got checked and balanced before it got printed. Whereas today, I mean, most people just want to be mean because they can be mean. Oh, look, I can be mean. I'm going to post something bad. Or, I'm going to give them 1 star just to make sure you don't get 5 stars on your 5-star review, And that happened. I've had that happen to me. And it really hurts because you're like, well, all we did was say we're going to do this thing, and all of a sudden I got a 1 star. Well, you haven't even seen it yet. How do I get a 1 star? But so I think back then it was better to be connected, and you could create a better base of people because you had a better platform for giving them the information, in my opinion. We have a wider platform now, but it's just not curated.
Do fans from the old days still reach out, try to find you, still try to ask you questions about games you made 25, 30 years ago?
Absolutely. I get questions all the time. Oh, do you happen to have the music, the XML file for that music that we could use, or the MIDI file to make that song? Because I'm making this new music, or, do you still have the source code? I'm looking for this graphic from that thing. So I get a lot of emails, text messages, etc., from fans all the time. And like I said, there's this huge fan base all over the world, like in Russia, where they listen to the music, just want to hear the music from some games. So yeah, I mean, they're very diverse.
So you've had a really long, really successful career in the game business, pretty much nonstop from those apartment days with New World Computing. Actually, just riff on some of the companies that you've worked for in the last 20 plus years.
Well, actually, it's not that many. So gaming wise, started at New World Computing. I was there for 15 years. We got bought by 3DO. So while I was at 3DO, I was actually still at New World Computing. I ran New World Computing at 3DO. So I guess you could throw 3DO into the mix, but I was still at New World Computing. Then I left and I started my own computing company called Rapid Eye Entertainment, where we did a game called Lords of EverQuest for Sony.
That was a really good game. I loved playing that game. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a real-time strategy game, kind of like Heroes of Might and Magic, but in real time instead of turn-based. And that's what they wanted me to develop. So we did that. We did some other games. And then I took a little bit of time off, traveled around, played World of Warcraft, whatever. And then, worked at Midway for a while and ran external development there for the third-party division. And I don't know how many games, but countless games, including Unreal Tournament at the time, Lord of the Rings Online, and a bunch of other games I was a producer for. And then from there, I went to Playdom, Disney. I quit there and started another company to do analytics. And now I've started another company to do game distribution, much like GOG and Steam does, but ours is called Robot Cash. And we want to give back to the gamers. So, that's what we're doing.
Wow. So, and you're still under 30. So that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing.
Yeah. I've been in for more than 30 years, but I'm still under 30. You got it.
Looking back at all of this, what do you take away from that original experience with New World that you've been able to use for the rest of your career, no matter where you've gone?
Don't be afraid to try new things, iterate. Don't just settle. Iterate, get other opinions. If everybody thinks the same, there's a problem. Work hard. I mean, I put a lot of hours in. I've always put a lot of hours in. I try to make sure I get it all done. Enlist the help of others if you need it. Otherwise, try to figure it out because it's rewarding when you actually get it done.
Wow. Mark, you have been really generous with your time today. I want to thank you. It's been great seeing you again. You're like Dorian Gray. You don't really change that much. It's kind of scary, but scary in a really, really good way. All right. Well, again, thanks a lot. I'm really looking forward to seeing the fans' reaction to these games on GOG. Let's touch base soon.
Sounds good. Good seeing you, Mike.